that up to now we have seen quite a few things. Ishvara is both maker and the material, and because it is the material cause, it pervades everything. So we can't give location to Ishvara. We can't make Ishvara one person. It is something which is it's defined as Sarvajnaha Sarvashaktiman. It has that knowledge to manifest as the universe, and knowledge and power to manifest as universe. So in the universe, when you go a little bit beyond forms, then all you see is Ishvara. Right? So if you go from little, you inquire little bit more than the wave that you see, what your eyes can see, then you discover what something else, which is a much bigger entity. Okay? Now that all knowledge, all power, which is the maker and the material, so how do you understand its presence everywhere? So the imagery of a thread and different beads was given. So now here the beads are all the different beings, and what are the threads? All the different laws, right, that govern the universe. So we saw it's not only about physical laws, but it includes law of karma, it includes the laws which give you intelligence, it includes laws which give you wealth, it's an entire gamut of laws which govern the universe. Okay? Then we saw that not only it is the strand, but it is also the beads, right? So we saw that every form itself, when you begin to look at it, right, not only is governed by intelligence, yours and my interaction is governed by intelligence. That very form itself is what? Nothing but intelligence manifest. So therefore, every form actually is reduced to atoms. But why is it that some permutations and combinations, the way they are used, create so different objects? Right? So this is where you see the presence of the intelligence in the forms themselves. Right? Then what we saw is, it's not just the forms and the laws and all the functional thing. It is also what all the aesthetics, all the beauty, everything. Okay? So that is something which is, this is why we are not, as a spiritual person, is not the person who is disinterested in the world. The spiritual person is the one who understands and has proper relationship with the world. Understands the world totally, not partially, and has proper relationship with the world. Okay? So there we also saw that within this the brilliance and the fragrance and everything, also there is one thing which is that the human, especially the beings which are endowed with free will, and they can either just waste away the senses, or what, they can master their senses. And when you do that, then what happens? You can live your life meaningfully. You can use, everything is meant for you to use, right? Nothing is meant to be stopped. Both your sense organs are given for you to, there is no interaction with the universe without the sense organs. Okay? Even your mind is extremely useful, because without mind you actually can't engage in the universe at all. Everything is sense. Yeah, sure.
One question I wanted to ask is that, okay, we're looking at all the beautiful beauty of everything. What about the flip side?
Yes.
Where there is the wars, when there is crying, just senseless crying, senseless torture, murdering a mother, murdering the daughter. I mean, I know Ishvara is there. I mean, it's a distortion of the mind.
It's a distortion.
But it is there.
It is there, exactly. Absolutely.
So we have to take it into
that also you have to take into account. Absolutely. It will come. So this is a very, very good point. In fact, it will come. It will come. Yeah. It will come because it's very important. You can't only attribute to Ishvara only good things. Right? And I will talk about it in detail. It is coming. So then we also, yeah. So now So any self-discipline or whatever, it will enable you to engage and make proper use of what the assets that are given to you, which is what your senses, your mind, your body, the entire thing is given to you for moksha. Human birth is meant for moksha. So this is where in Kena Upanishad it is said that iha chet na veda iti mahati vinashti. If you come with a human body and you come with the possibility of figuring out what the universe is all about in its entirety, and if you just waste away your senses in just things forms that you see, and some simple inferences, and just waste away your mind as well as your senses, it's a human birth which is wasted. You can do so much with it, and you have just dealt with it at a very superficial level. So this is what it says. Now the next verse is talking about, now you think, okay, now what else is remaining as Ishvara? Is there anything?
You said we'll talk about tapas in emotions.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, thank you for reminding me.
It was interesting enough that I didn't want to let it go.
Good. Good, I had forgotten. I wanted to move to the next verse, but it's very good. Now tapas in, thank you. Tapas in emotions is another very important thing. The first rule of emotion is that you can't totally eliminate emotions. So any spiritual teaching which is asking you to get rid of your, common teaching is get rid of your anger, get rid of your fears, get rid of your desires, just clean and wash your mind off of all these what we call negative emotions. Okay? So the minute and in fact from childhood we have heard this, and from childhood we have told our kids some implicit message that good girls and good boys, they don't cry, they don't get angry, they don't have fears. So what happens to a child is, the child feels all these emotions but wants to appear as good in front of the parents. So the only way the child knows how to deal with these emotions is what? Suppress them. Because the minute you start showing, then either you are punished or you are told that you are no good, right? Or you are, kind of made to feel inadequate. Sometimes so much fear is inflicted on you that if you do this next time, then I will do this. Reprimand. You're reprimanded. So then the only way the child, poor guy, for the child, a guy or a girl, the universe is parents and they keep hearing all these things. So they just very nicely hide all these emotions. Now when you hide...
It doesn't happen only with the parents, it happens with my wife. I see Birzara and I profusely cry.
Who? You?
I. So she says, I am feeling ashamed, she's behind.
Unlike you, I cry at everything.
So she's, yeah, exactly. So see, we are not used to demonstration of emotions. So true, We've created societies where we kind of hide. And this is why, in fact, it's interesting. In the US also, it's very much like when you meet people socially, you can't really, nobody wants to hear your problems, nobody wants to hear your... So you have a good time. So good time is you always talk about, let's say, acceptable, things, what's going on in politics, and my boss, something, but nothing really connected to you. You don't really reveal yourself. But human beings can't live like that. So therefore, they have now started all these professional services. Almost everybody goes and sees some psychologist. Because they need to find some outlet. You can't just keep it all inside. Right? So therefore you can be surrounded by people and still feel lonely because you don't really share your essential things. And then And there is so much of this taboo, right? That if I really start saying what I really feel or what I did, so that is another thing. And there is every human being who has a dark side. There is no human being who is only clean sheet. It's not possible. That everybody has something about their life which they don't want to share with anybody. There is some guilt attached, there is some shame attached, you feel you'll be judged, what will somebody think of me if I reveal this? This is true for everyone. So everybody lives and interacts with the world with certain amount of facade. You put up a front of who you are, right? And you don't totally reveal everything that you really feel. So now, but do you think that you can just camouflage the whole thing forever? No. When it is staying there and if it is unaddressed, right, it comes out. There is an external trigger. Something will trigger, and what will happen is there will be a reaction. And that, how do you know that this is all, so every time what the situation calls for, and if your reaction is like multifold, you understand that all this is like pressure cooker, you suppress it, and then what? It all just comes out. So therefore, emotions, that tapas, it does not mean suppressing emotions, right? That is very important. A lot of times people come to me and they said, before I used to just speak up, but now I'm keeping quiet. So as though they are making a very big, attempt, big shift of growth. And in some cases it's very good that they are able to contain the outbursts and aggressive behaviors. It's very healthy, but we are not really talking about, suppressing. We are talking about dealing with emotions. Okay? So now there are different, so all the emotional dealings, there is no one key. It's not like every emotion has to be dealt with in the same way. So there are two things which are talked about with reference to what is tapas with reference to your emotional life mean. It means two different things. One is what we call dhamma and the other one is shama. Okay? So dhamma is that, if you really look at your mind, per day, approximately you have 60,000 thoughts. And if you are a yogi and if you really have some huge discipline, then maybe you can reduce it to I don't know how many. I have no idea, maybe 30, 20 but I think still 40 or whatever, right? So that means, but on an average, you have all these 60,000 thoughts. Or let's say even if you try a lot to quieten your mind, then you can maybe reduce it to half. Now, are you in control of what is going to be your next thought? If I ask you 5 minutes from now, what are you going to think? Do you know? So I can say, okay, now 5 minutes is too far. 3 minutes from now, do you know what your next, in fact, do you know what your next thought is going to be? So therefore, anybody who tells you to control your whole thought process doesn't know that what, if you had total control, then you can control. But you have no control because you don't know what your next thought is going to be. So therefore, we are not talking about controlling the mind. This is a very common misconception. We are not talking about controlling the mind. We are talking about mastering the mind. So, Dhamma means there are some thoughts which will come and they will pass. Right? Now, you don't need to engage with each of these 30,000 thoughts and try to make a very major analysis of why did this thought come and is it valid or not. what will happen if you try to stay with each thought and try to find it, that, okay, now what could have been better in this thought? What will happen?
Totally confused.
You will be
Yes.
totally confused and you will be obsessed.
We'll have more than 60,000 thoughts for sure.
Exactly. You'll have more than 60,000 thoughts because each thought will take so much time to analyze, right? And if you want to get every thought to its perfection, then what will happen? So that is not possible. So this whole Dhamma is beautiful. It says you don't, if the thought comes, right, you don't need to necessarily engage with every thought. A thought comes and thought goes. If you don't give it any shape, if you don't use your free will to do something with it, then what? It will not create any karma. Karma is only when you use your free will and do something with it. So imagine that thought comes, right? As you are meditating and some sound comes and you feel little irritated, right? Now what will happen if you don't engage with it? It will pass. How long will it take? How long will it last? Tell me. Seconds. It will not do anything to you. But suppose that sound and there is this irritation and then you say, oh my God, now my meditation is all spoiled. I can't. Then you want it to stop. I want this sound to stop. Then the sound will come again. Then what?
And it becomes louder somehow.
Then it becomes,
yeah.
exactly. Your irritation will be more. Then you almost want to go and throw some stone at this whatever was disturbing you. So from the time that you engage with the thought, then your karma starts. And your karma can be 3 types. Manasa karma, Kaika karma and Vachika karma. So that means even the mental build-up, I want this sound to stop right now. That bird is really irritating me. That person is just so, kind of inconsiderate. And then you say, oh, now everybody in India is so inconsiderate. What happens? You are building. And that building is the one which then becomes mental karma. Because then you have used your free will to engage with that thought and you are building a story around it. Then over a period of time, that mental thought will also come out as speech. Right? Because what you speak, you first initially think of. Then it becomes what? Vachika karma. So how you speak and what you speak gives away to a lot of people your maturity. So much of you is given away by how you talk. You don't realize how much of yourself you give away when you talk. Right? So then it becomes Vachika karma. Then it also can become what? Kaika karma. It can actually become a physical action. So this is how you then gather karma. So Dhamma means what? Many of your thoughts which come and they are okay to come, what? You can just let go without what? Staying with it and reinforcing it with karma, either mental or verbal or physical.
I have a small question.
Yes.
One of the meditation techniques I learned talked about labeling emotions and then letting them go. Is that engaging as well?
Yeah, I would never label emotion. Label in
So-
what sense? Like
So,
what,
so for
what is a
example,
label?
you observe thoughts, right?
Yes.
And let's say you realize that you keep going back to this thought, and then you realize it's because you're anxious about something.
Okay.
You say, okay, I understand, I'm anxious about this, but I'll now let it go because I've figured out that this is anxiety.
That is lovely. No, this is
That's
that
not
is
engagement,
that is
right?
no, no. This is healthy.
Addressing.
This is addressing. Yeah, you can acknowledge what you are feeling, but then you said I'll address it later. No, this is wonderful.
And when we go deeper, when we say let's examine the cause of this, let's say I'm feeling envious of someone, and there letting it go will not be very
No,
helpful.
no,
Because
exactly.
I actually want to figure out why I'm
Absolutely.
envious.
So this is why there is a second thing which is shama. So there are two things. One is dama and the other one is
I
shama.
just wanted to figure
So-
out what engagement here means.
Yes, exactly. So dhamma means so many small things. You know you feel sometimes you look at somebody and you feel little sad. So you don't need to every time do some major investigation and corrections and all that. A lot of it, what I'm saying is you can just let it pass. But you can't let pass everything, as Nita says. That is not the way, right? Some things require a little bit of looking into, right? So there, let's look at one emotion, which is, let's say, fear, right? So fears all of us have, and fear itself is something which is not a negative emotion. So this categorization of emotion into positive and negative is something which is not a very healthy way of looking at emotions. Because imagine your faculty of fear, if you didn't have, then what you would do is when you're crossing the road, you will nicely walk at your own pace, totally oblivious of this fast running car. What will happen? One day or the other you will be run over. Okay? So that means that fear gives you that the eyes see the car coming fast, the eyes will send signal to the brain will what activate fear signals. And that fear signal is a healthy signal because it will make you take actions to protect yourself. So if you can't call the fear negative because it is serving you it is saving your life.
In fact, you can say the same for all the major emotions.
Yeah?
For example, sadness also. Then disgust. Then what else? Guilt.
Anger.
Even
I
guilt.
know what you mean.
Even anger. So you want me to say?
Guilt, yeah. I'd like to know
So
what
guilt,
it
for
is.
example, when you feel guilty, it makes you in fact come back and reflect upon what you have done. It's very healthy, in fact. We are not speaking about like a bit totally consumed by guilt. This is another side, okay? But otherwise, it's like very healthy. Sadness also, when there is a loss, it makes you withdraw for a while and reflect and try to digest and mourn over the loss, either an object or somebody that you loved and so on. And then also at some point also seek some comfort and some support with relationships. The sadness, you cannot just leave it by yourself. So there is also a very healthy and useful side to this emotion. You cannot say it's negative. If you enter into a depression, a real depression, then of course it's like
No, but
it's something.
depression also really helps with emotional
Yeah.
growth
Yeah.
because it makes you look deeper into why am
Exactly.
I feeling this way.
True.
So
Yeah.
And jealousy would be the same sort of
So-
category. How would you handle jealousy, the flip side?
So jealousy, it's a little bit a mix. You want to speak about jealousy?
Jealousy I can speak, but you have something to say?
See, for example, also disgust. You are disgusted. So what is like, let's say, beneficial about disgust?
perhaps we're staying away from things that are not healthy
exactly.
for us.
So it's like a kind of, as you say, it's a very innate programming from this limbic brain, which is this like archaic,
Amygdala.
yeah, archaic brain, among which there is the amygdala. And then it was serving this purpose of there is some foul smell, or there is something which looks like rotten or whatever, then it activates the disgust. And to keep you away from that. Okay? So all this emotion you cannot label as like negative. Initially you think it's negative, but in fact it's not. Okay? In fact this categorization is not, it doesn't work. Yeah.
So let's say, so that means that first rule of emotion is that don't label emotions and don't try to eliminate emotions. They serve function. Okay? But when does the fear require correction? In this case, when you are afraid, when you are crossing and you just want to go fast, there is no correction required. But there are some cases in which your fears require correction. Okay? So I have a friend, and what she was telling is that there was this financial crisis during 2008-2009, and she belongs to a pretty elite group and very wealthy people, and so she said that in the parties the only thing that people were talking about is what? This fear of losing their wealth. So that means for many of them it had not yet happened. But it's a possibility, it's true. It is a possibility, but when is it that you need to think about the possible dangers and take some actions? When you are
It's about to happen.
when you are in the office, or when you have to make some decisions, then you have to bring in all the possible risks, and you need to take care of what are the risks, and then how you can avert those risks. That is the time that you need to really bring to your mind. There is nothing wrong with it. But imagine you're going to a party and you're just building up story. What if I lose everything? And is it productive? Are you doing anything proactive about it? What are you doing? You're building a story about something which has not even happened. And you're creating a mindset which is fear, totally fear-based for events which have not even happened yet. Right? So that means that there is a time to think and make decisions. That is very good, that's healthy. But here it is totally useless. Okay? So this is how our mind works. It makes us paralyzed. Paralyzed with events which have not yet happened. Right? And that occupies us. So this is the fear which needs to be dealt with.
Fear of death.
Fear of death. In fact, I can totally tell you, I totally, when I was a young child and I first discovered the fact that there is a death, and I used to love my father, and I all of a sudden felt, oh my God, what if I lose him? And it really grips you. And in fact, there was nothing wrong with him, and he was totally healthy and he was totally fine. But as a child, I couldn't handle the possibility of him going, and it seemed as though, yeah, it can happen anytime. Right? So events which have not occurred, and there is not a very high possibility, but you dwell on it, and it becomes source of huge fear. So these are the fears that you need to deal with. Right? And so there also I think it's very important, because even this fear of death or sadness, which is connected to losing somebody dear, so there also one has to be very careful, because I know how unintelligent people can be in dealing with these emotions. So when we were in Bangkok, we were called by somebody to say that my neighbor, the main person, He had gone to Europe on business and he had a heart attack and he died. So his body was brought and he had 2 kids, teenage kids, right? And the kids were devastated. Obviously, right? I mean, the father is completely hale and hearty and just goes on a business trip and just collapses and then gone, right? Now, obviously they were crying and they were like in grief and in shock and everything. Now there is this Pandit, they called, and the Pandit is telling them that, grieving is not good because what? The bodies come and bodies go. So he is giving very big, so-called knowledge of Gita. Do they need?
Inappropriate time.
Totally inappropriate time.
What happened?
It just doesn't help. The kids are not available. They haven't called him to get jnana of the life. They are just grieving. And what do you need to do? So this is why the kids were angry at the priest. They said, we are not staying here for a minute. He is giving us bhashan which is totally uncalled for. So therefore, these people used to come to our class and they called us. They said, can you talk to these young kids? They are really disturbed. And the first thing we said is, it is an occasion for sadness. If this is not something for which you will grieve, when will you be sad? You will be sad and it's okay to be sad. If you try to resist or suppress, you will have problems later. So, what kind of problems? You can have health problems. When deep emotions are suppressed, it will all start showing up in your physical body. This is how it's connected.
Can be depression also.
There can be depression. There can be all kinds of things. If you undealt with emotions means it's dangerous.
Emotions are damn sneaky.
Yeah?
They just stay hidden forever.
Absolutely.
You see, they're done with. And
Absolutely.
some other area of life will pop up.
They'll pop up. Absolutely. So therefore, they require what first, the first thing is to acknowledge the presence of emotion. Like how you said, I am anxious. Lovely. It's very, very important to say to yourself, I am feeling sad. Because it is the reality. We never even say to ourselves. The thought comes and we try to brush it aside. Say, I am feeling sad.
And this is how this negative comes. When it is unpleasant, then it's not easy to stay with that. Then we say it's negative.
Yes.
So everything which is unpleasant is labeled as negative, and everything which is pleasant is positive. Right? This is the fun of the whole thing. This.
So therefore, the first step is I'm feeling sad. Okay. Now after, so for example, and there are some real reasons, if it is a demise of somebody, as Surya says, you need some time to grieve. You can't stop it. So nowadays what people do, they actually take pills to reduce the sensation of sadness, grief. But actually I think one of the maturity is to go through the emotions, because it's very important that the mind processes it, the whole range of emotions. You block one, which is let's say sadness, then other centers of happiness also get blocked. Then you become this artificial, the person who is as though detached from the universe. You abort your centers of emotions. That means you are not fully able to engage. There is some kind of a block with which you live your life. This is artificial. Okay? So therefore, begin, and some of it could be just a matter of expressing, experiencing, and it will go. Some of it may require correction. Because imagine after 6 months of somebody's passing away, you feel life is meaningless. Now what is the reason to live? And you have this deep sense of loss and you just become non-productive. Then what happens? Then slowly, slowly you have to help yourself to get back to this normal thing. But after having expressed it, and for first, the rule is first 6 months that grief will come and go. And don't try to stop it. When you are feeling like that, you in fact stay with it. Learn to stay with your emotions rather than dodging them. And if there is some correction required, slowly and gently do that correction. So for example, in that party, when you are building a story, right, about some fears that are coming in your mind, you can tell that right now is really not the time for that, as Neeta said, right? Right, I am feeling fear, it has come up, but right now it's not really the time for me to build a story on all possible risks. When I'm at work tomorrow, or when I'm in the daytime, when I have to engage, I will think about what are the possible risks and I will take care of it. So you have to tell yourself that. Because it has some reasonable ground. So what you do is, instead of saying, oh, this is wrong, you tell yourself, this is a very right thing to do. I will address it. But there is an appropriate time, an appropriate occasion. Here, I am not doing anything. I am only creating what? Trauma within me, panic within me. It doesn't serve anything. So these are the things that you begin to do when you become aware of your emotional life. Tapas. It's not denial, it is what? Managing. Cleverly managing your emotions. Then there are some other things which are what we call deep orientations, which come from childhood. So there also it is just incredible, these deep fears that we have, and they can be, I have, in fact, just recently I met somebody who had exactly the same issue as somebody else who also told me the same story. Okay, that when she was young, they have all these people have nannies, who look after. And when they put her to sleep, the nanny is interested in getting the child to sleep as fast as possible. So there, what the nanny used to tell her is, if you don't sleep now, bhoot will come, ghost will come. A child's brain is frightened. So therefore, she says, even till today, I cannot sleep alone at night. And she now is mother of 2 kids. These are deep orientation. They have stayed. It's nothing, no big, now as an adult, what? You can easily deal with it. But a child with a child's brain has what? Gotten in some deep fears. It works at a very deep orientation level, that you are afraid of dark. You can't sleep alone. Another friend of mine told me exactly the same story. She says, my son started stammering altogether. So initially, all of a sudden, and she took him to the doctor to see why, he is stammering all of a sudden. And then the child was showing fear. So then they started asking, so why do you have fear? And this is exactly what child told, that this nanny tells me that sher will enter, bhoot will enter to make me sleep. And since it was detected soon. So now they took him to, he had to do sessions of psychotherapy and speech therapy, and he said even now he stammers a little bit. Not much, but he still does. So therefore, they are not just these simple corrections. These are deep. And sometimes it can be even far subtler. These nannies are, you leave your kids with people who are uneducated, unaware, psychologically, totally, and you just bring a human being to this world, and when this human being needs the most in terms of education, value, whatever, you just leave it to somebody who is like totally clueless. And it has repercussions. So that also, there is another friend of mine who told me a very nice, and it's a very subtle story, where she said that her daughter, she goes to work, and her daughter also stays with the nanny. And she says, now I found that my daughter was not really willing to share her food, and so like generally you teach your kids to, whatever you have, you give to others, and she was very possessive about what she had. So she says, now why is my child, she wasn't comfortable with the fact that her child was not sharing the food. So she kind of looked a little bit, and she found exactly the same thing. The nanny, when the child was being fed, and the child, how they want to play, they don't want to eat and all, then she would say, if you don't eat now, the neighbor's kids will come and take the food away. Then what is the child wanting to do? My food is going to go, so what? I preserve it. Then if it is not corrected in the childhood, it's not only food, it becomes orientation.
But it's not only nannies, parents do it too.
Yeah.
These are very popular tactics of getting children to eat and sleep.
Yeah, so that is very, very destructive.
So scary, no?
It's so scary because you instill fear, and deep, deep fears which people will continue to have them for years to come. It's like imprinting in the child, in the program. And I was also, these are very common things, but people do it so casually and they don't realize the impact that it has. I was also on this Juhu beach, and I saw a mother exactly talking to a child, and she just gave something for child to eat, and the child was like, not eating so much, and the mother is telling her, if you don't eat, I'll leave you here and go. Now imagine a child finds one, and the child is not able to see that these are just casual kind of sentences, Creates fear. What if my mom, will lead to this whole thing of what, I'll be left alone. So these are very intentional, and if these are all small things and they can imprint you. Now imagine if a child was abused. Or the father was drunk, and every day started shouting at kids, or what, wife quarrels, what impact it would have. These are small things, they seem like nothing, and still they leave this. Now imagine all the other things that go on in homes. And what it leaves here. So therefore, these have become, if you don't, most of the time we don't take care of them, so therefore they remain with us, but they are deeper orientations. They are just not like, okay, now I have fear about this stock market, so now I'll deal with it tomorrow and not at the party. This is a simple correction. The other thing is a much deeper correction which is required, where you actually have to sit with yourself and little bit think, there has to be little bit of self-reflection. Because each one, either it is some sadness or fear or anger, there's some issues which what everybody, which has become an orientation for people. Now, how do you deal with it? So this is why some of the things can be, some 2-3 major orientations can actually, if you really look at your own life, you can yourself easily trace it back to certain events. You don't even need a psychoanalyst or anything, you yourself can figure out. So one of the things that our teacher used to make us do is what? Write everything. Because the minute you start writing, let's say you are upset now, then you just think that something, this is called shama, processing. Why am I upset? Right? What irritates me so much? What are the assumptions that I am making? How am I building a story around it? Where did I start building this story? A little bit when I look, I can trace it back to certain events in my childhood. And what will happen is it will, all the chains and chains and chains of how you felt, how, how you were incapable of dealing with it when you were a child, the pain that was attached to it, everything will come out. It's a child's world.
So even it might not even pinpoint the actual problem, but it can somehow flow and come out.
It can, exactly.
While you're writing.
While you are writing, the number of connections that you make, and exactly, because you are beginning to express it, and then it will all, your mind itself will take you from one thing to the other. Jumble, but still it will come out. And what our teacher used to say, that if there is this whole sensation of anger which is coming, then instead of saying, oh no, I should not be thinking like this about my mother or whatever, you have to say it. I was really angry with it, because that's how you felt. So what you have to do is write it all out. And then what do? Our teacher used to say, you can just read it. When you read it, before it was what? Inside. Now where is it? Left your system. Left your system. And then you read it, then you begin to see all this whole load you have been carrying within you. Unacknowledged, unrecognized. But it kept interfering in your transactions. Once you get some hang of it, then what do? You tear it off. You don't need to show it to anyone. You don't, because when you show it, you say, my God, what is all this? Right?
No, you don't want that.
You don't want that.
Yeah, the most honest journaling happens when you're absolutely secure that nobody
will read it. Absolutely.
Yeah. The most honest journaling happens.
Absolutely.
Then.
But does it really help?
It does.
Really helps.
It takes out like burdens like this. It is like, when one of my friends went to one management seminar, and they said, okay, if I ask you to hold this, it's no big deal, right? Just pick this up and hold it. But if I ask you to hold it for 1 hour, then what?
There's a pain.
There is a pain. Now if I ask you to hold it for 24 hours, you will start cursing me. Right? So that means this is how our whole emotional baggage is. We collect, we keep, we build, and it all stays here.
And every part of it is true. I've had insights while writing, and I write when I get emotionally upset.
Right. And did you tear it?
Sorry?
Do you tear it?
I don't tear it. I do it digitally, so I don't tear it. I just keep it password locked, just so nobody accidentally reads it. But I have insights and realizations when I write. I also have resolution when I write. Sometimes I arrive at the the bottom of the emotion, like why this came to, it doesn't mean that I immediately figure out how I will now handle it, and there will be subsequent times that I reflect upon it, but I can see that the burden has become a lot less. Like if it was anger, it has become a lot less because I have stopped to consider why I'm angry and consider the other points of person's point of view. If it's something personal, even then you have insights about yourself. It's the most useful tool for like healing yourself emotionally, I've found. Very true.
Our teacher used to make every. See, unfortunately, what happens is that people have all these baggage and they find it difficult to handle. Then they come to Vedanta because what you're free, it attracts them. Then what happens? It becomes a tool for what you're free, you're Brahman, and this and that will give what they said. Yeah, now this is all what.
It's not you.
It's not me. It will continue to rule you. Our teacher was so brilliant.
Works wonderfully.
Yeah, he says you can't just use this information to ignore this. Unless you have worked on all this, there is no possibility of knowing this bigger picture. You're caught in this paradigm. There is no way. This is why all these tapas is something that you can't bypass all of this and then come to know the reality. These are all alignments to Ishvara. Ishvara's psychological order you can't bypass. Ishvara as dharma you can't bypass. You need to take care. Only when there is alignment at this level, bigger realities become clearer. Otherwise, everything is a jumble. So this is where it's critical. Your emotional life you need to deal with. And you can't use this Brahman as an escape route to bypass your emotional life.
What about the traumas that we can't necessarily recall? Because there are some that we suppress so deep within.
Yeah. So what they say is that, there are so many things that may be stored and you don't really need to worry about it, right? But when a situation arises, at the right time, it will manifest. So that means in Ishvara's order, time has come for you to deal with this particular thing. So you don't also want to over hurry and you go along with that.
Because it has to come out sometime.
It will
It's not
come out
going to be
sometime, exactly. So whatever surfaces you deal with that, and you can be proactive and figure out something more. But there are deep things which are not yet surfaced, you don't worry about it. It will come when its time is there.
You can take help also.
Absolutely.
If really this journaling and so on, and some of the other like meditation practice doesn't help, then you can take help, professional help. It's very important also.
Yeah. The other thing which is in that deep orientations, one thing is also very important, and that is prayerfulness. Because in spite of all these journaling and writing and this, there is what the emotional life has its own length. You can't decide. So there you need to pray. That prayer, all your people ask that how this whole maturity in Vedanta is different from psychology. We have so much psychology, right? Because psychology is not other than Ishvara. It's also manifestation of what? Ishvara. The law of psychology is also, don't take it as this and Ishvara. Ishvara includes everything. But in addition to that, as I said, there is an entity there. It's not just a mechanical law. There is an entity which is Ishvara to which you can pray. So your prayerfulness is it's an action that you are choosing, and then that will produce a result. So therefore, prayer is a very, very big tool. It helps you to get over everything. So sometimes what I used to do is, sometimes you don't know what action you should take and what are the consequences of that action that you take. So I would write that, okay, this is a possibility and I don't know exactly, because I can't see every possible future outcome of the decision that I make today, and I would just put it in front of a deity. And you won't believe, it's just amazing how the situations unfold in a way that some things which I did not know will be some things will clear and open up. So that means you do what you have to do with your free will, but ask for help. Because as a human being, you can't know everything. It's impossible to know everything. So you ask for help when you are helpless. And if you ask somebody else for help, everybody is equally helpless in some way. So you ask there is only one place where you can really ask for help, and that is what? Ishvara. So this is how the prayerfulness, healing, and in fact our teacher used to say some of the prayers, for example, Rudra. Rudram is one of the most powerful prayers to get rid of some of these so many duritas. It says Ghora Papa Nashini. Some major things we could have done, known, unknown, whatever, it's capable of at least offsetting some. So you have formal prayers, you have informal prayers, your words, anything. But help yourself. This is a big tool that is available. So therefore, this is how you deal with your Dama and Shama. Emotional tapas. The tapas with reference to your emotions. Processing, some simple corrections, some deep orientations, and some of it just letting go. And you need to use discretion. Sometimes people, I knew somebody to the child. When the child did something very small, she would really get angry and reprimand. And when the child did something big, then she would not say anything. So that means when to intervene, when not to intervene, nothing is clear. So all that, even with reference to your emotional life, when to let go, when to process, how much to process, at what level, all this requires a lot of wisdom and grace.
Prayers would also help.
Sorry?
Prayers will help the clarity.
Yeah, absolutely. They give you this clarity. So now, the next verse is talking about, now if you think, now everything, all this is Ishvara. So when you're getting well, you are what? Within, aligning with Ishvara. Now, what else is Ishvara? Is there anything else that you can think of? It seems as though we have covered everything, but the next verse shows something else. So here it says, Bijam mam sarva bhutanam vidhi partha sanatanam buddhir buddhimatam asmi tejas tejasvi namaham. So there, one thing which is very interesting that this whole manifest universe that we see, it seems to be all very stable. Right? So Rashna of 10 minutes ago seems like the same. But is it?
Subtle change.
So many subtle changes are happening that you don't see. So within this manifest universe, there is constant what? Shift from manifest to unmanifest. In terms of time, right? By the time I start this sentence, it is time t1. And when I finish the sentence, what? It's a different time, t2. So that means the time changes. Within that, what so many subtle changes that are happening, which is what we call the whole manifest universe itself is a constant shift between what? Manifest and unmanifest. The second which was unmanifest second ago is manifest now. What is manifest now is going to become unmanifest. So that means Ishvara is not only what? The manifest, it is also what? The unmanifest, which is yet to come into manifestation. And that connection which connects the manifest to unmanifest, some of it we see, some of it we don't see at all. It seems like all stability. So this is why when we have this whole depiction of Ishvara, it incorporates that. We say Brahma, Trinity. Brahma is what? Every second new things are coming into manifestation. So many cells have what come and so many cells have gone. So many bodies every day. How many bodies go and how many bodies come? So there is what? Brahma is constant, that intelligence which brings into manifestation things which were unmanifest before. Now, then what is Rudra? Rudra is what? Lord Shiva. What comes into manifestation has to become unmanifest. So that seems like us what? That transformation from manifestation to non-manifestation is, in our language we call destruction. Something which is manifest now becomes unmanifest, we say destruction. And who is the Lord? The intelligence which makes what? That thing which is manifest, unmanifest is what? Shiva, destruction. And in between this birth and constant birth and destruction, there is a seeming stability. That is Vishnu. Trinity. Okay. Brahma, that intelligence which constantly brings into manifestation. That is Shiva, what? This thing which destroys, and then within that there is a seemingly constancy. If things were changing and you constantly see all the change, you won't be able to interact with the universe. If I constantly saw all the changes that are taking place in your body, our teacher used to say, nobody will fall in love with anybody else. If I saw your digestive system doing all the things, and all your liver doing tuck, 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 and your stomach and intestines and all, will anybody fall in love with somebody else? You are given a beautiful cover. Right? When you see this, then you fall in love, you say, oh, what a beautiful eyes. Then you don't see all the mechanics of all the wires and everything if I saw.
Disgust.
So this is how, and there is, in that stability there is all transactions possible. You fall in love, you have all kinds of things, you have romance, you have everything is possible.
That seemingly constant.
That seeming constancy. Design. So this is what he says, that that itself is all three. Now what happens is also this Vedic thing is, and I will finish and then I will talk about this unmanifest and manifest a little bit more. But you know that the principle of destruction is something that you are afraid of, right? Generally destruction is you are afraid of. So when you do puja to Shiva, what are you doing?
You're asking him to destroy the unwanted things.
Excellent. The power of destruction you use, you invoke the grace of power of destruction to what? Destroy all your fears and destroy all the things that you know, that you feel that you don't want. And you can also ask that same power to destroy what? Ignorance. And it can make you see things clearly. Okay? So that means you embrace powers of the universe rather than fighting it. This is how you begin to flow with life, flow with Ishvara. You convert, these are all conversions. So this is all what we call human growth. The very thing that you fight, you face it, and then what? Convert.
So all this deep-rooted fears,
So
everything comes-
everything. So you ask for Rudra, and this is why our teacher used to say, Rudram you have to chant every day.
You must teach us, Rudram.
Is it very long?
It is long. It is between what, 15, 20
20
minutes. Yeah. But you have to do proper intonations and all that. But it is very, very powerful chant. But if you want to learn, I can teach. But it takes.
When not?
So we'll think about it. So therefore, this is how you begin to understand the universe and live with it. Now this bijam, so that means that the unmanifest, in that also there is intelligence. And in the manifest also there is intelligence. So one of the examples of the unmanifest having intelligence is in here it is says I am the bija. Okay, so there is Chandogya Upanishad where the father tells the son, you break the seed, and he says, what do you find inside the seed? And the son says, I don't find anything, I don't see anything inside the seed. And then the son concludes that there is nothing. What father says is, this is a childish conclusion. In that seed, where you don't see anything, there is this program. There is this program for the entire tree and how it is going to be, and whether it is tamarind tree, the tamarind seed will give rise to tamarind tree, and mango seed will give rise to only mango tree. Then how old is going to be this tree? The whole programming is there. Do you see anything? You don't see anything. Right? So that presence of intelligence, in that is all everything coded.
Is that called potential?
So that is what it is potential. In the seed, there is potential for the whole tree. Right? And in the tree, there is a potential for what?
Red to die?
And also the next seed,
Seed,
next
yeah,
fruit
yeah,
and
yeah,
seed,
yeah,
which
yeah.
then again will give rise. So there is a cycle there. Manifest, unmanifest. Manifest, unmanifest. Right? And that is where Ishvara is. The moment has not come into manifestation, there is an intelligence which makes it manifest today. We all come with karma. And within that karma, this is what we call prarabdha karma. Prarabdha karma means the set of karma that we have to exhaust in this world. On the first day of life, your entire prarabdha karma comes? No. Only some karma. The rest remain what? Unmanifest. One day, some karma come into manifestation. The rest of the karma remain unmanifest. The next day, the previous day's karma become unmanifest, and today's karma come into manifestation. Even within the day, morning karma has become manifest. Evening karma is yet to manifest. Manifest, unmanifest. Manifest, unmanifest. Constant change. Is the intelligence only in the manifest universe? It is so intricately connected with the unmanifest. So the intelligence, Ishvara, is both what? Manifest, the intelligence which pervades manifest and unmanifest. In unmanifest, as Rachna said, is potential. And potential collapses into manifestation. Right? And this is how all the genetic programming is what? It's all carrying forward from what, when. So when you have diabetes, the doctor will first thing will ask you, does anybody in your family have diabetes? Why? How is that person who existed, what, 100 or 50 years ago, how is that person's life connected to yours? Through what? Genetics. All unmanifest which will come, and you may be not born with diabetes, but by the time you are 50, then what? It becomes manifest. So therefore, this manifest and unmanifest cycle, you have to understand Ishvara as both. Now, if this is the case, before the entire manifestation of the creation, what was there? In the creation itself, what? There is manifest and unmanifest. But before time came, before space came, before every object came, what was there? That intelligence is a potential, which can then give what? From it came the whole universe, manifest universe. Taittiriya Upanishad says that, so kamayata bahusyam prajayeti. Okay? That there was this thing, and that one thing which is what? In the potential form, which what? Manifested as many. And when it manifests as many, then if you look into the truth of the form, the same intelligence is there. So before the entire time, space and object framework came, it is what? That intelligence is given a different name. What is the name? Maya. Potential. The intelligence which has a potential to manifest. When the manifestation happened, the same intelligence is called what? Ishvara, the cause of the universe. The universe, before the universe comes into being, you can't call it the cause of the universe, because the universe has not yet come. You call it Maya. Once the universe comes, the same intelligence is called what? Ishvara, the cause of the universe, from which came all the names, forms, time, space, framework. this is what we call, and in fact, if you really look at it, you know, this whole thing of this Big Bang, right? So, so all these scientists are thinking about before the Big Bang, what was there? They don't know. But can you say nothing? Because if you say the whole world came from nothing, it defies what? Cause and effect relationship. You can't have an effect without a cause. Something cannot come from nothing. Okay. So therefore, and is this presence of Ishvara, it is just a belief? If it is now, here and now, if I just creep below the form, if I see only that intelligence, and right now it is changing from manifest to unmanifest, what is what? It doesn't require any other proof. Because even in the manifest universe, there is a constant what? Manifest and unmanifest. And intelligence pervades everything. And this is why Surya attended one class of Swamiji. You want to say? Okay. Now just very quickly, that even this Maya, which is what the potential, which can manifest at a given time, is also where in our right now.
I just wanted to ask this potential. That means it's all programmed, the creation and the full creation, right down to the unmanifest, is programmed from the creation. You know, like we said about the seed. The seed is programmed to become that tree.
Yes.
With its fruit, that
Yes.
particular tree.
Yes.
And then how it will bring more fruits or whatever.
Yes.
So by the same logic, wouldn't that be for the whole universe? That from the time that it's manifested itself, the full programming is done?
See,
for
the
its
full
time?
program, yes, the full programming is done, but within that full programming, you still have free will.
That's the choices.
That's the choices. So that means the universe is in making. It's not totally fixed. So for example, today, the way we collapse the choices, it is going to shape the universe. Right? We are participants in the universe, so depending upon how we participate, exactly, responsibly or irresponsibly, that will affect the future. So it's not totally programmed. But the free will, the possibility of free will is also part of this intelligence, right? You give some species free will and then give them capacity to participate in that making, that shape it, exactly. Otherwise, what happens? Everything becomes totally fatalistic. That everything is totally programmed and you're just like a puppet, you know.
It doesn't matter.
And then it doesn't matter what you do. So here it is not like that. Who you are today is a result of what choices you have made yesterday. And what you are going to be in the future is function of choices that you are going to make today. So that means you have an incentive to what? Evolve. Yeah. So this is how this whole, I will just end the class by saying that for example, Swamiji, the way he used this whole concept of Maya also to show how everything functions. So imagine that you have kidney cells, right? In those kidney cells, some things become manifest and every other possibility what the cell can do is what? Blocked. So therefore, they have these stem cells. So stem cells are what? Just cells that are there in the body. Now, if you place the stem cell in the kidney, it will start behaving like what? Kidney cell. So that means just by changing the placement, some functions are blocked and some functions come to manifest. If the same cell is placed in liver, it will behave as liver cell. So then others are blocked and this particular functions come into manifest. In the stem cell, the potential for it to be anything exists. This is intelligence. The whole creation is made like that. Same atoms, same particles. You block some, you manifest some, it becomes a rock. You block some, you manifest some other, it becomes what? Water. Atoms. So that means this is how the whole universe is created. You manifest some, you block some. The same material with different permutations and combinations. That intelligence gives and appears. What a varied universe. So this is Ishvara according to Vedanta. So how it takes you from step by step as to what all Ishvara is. So that it can't stop. Your understanding cannot stop at a given point. It has to go all the way. Then we will see tomorrow what else Ishvara is.
The stem cell is something so new. So maybe in another 10 years something else will come up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which again
Everything is
proves
a
that it
potential.
is.
Yeah, absolutely. So now they say that so many of these things, a friend of mine, her son has what we call diabetes, which is juvenile. So that means at a young age, this child gets diabetes. And she says there's already some research which is done in the US, where they have to carry there is some mechanism, yeah, which will,
Some pump.
some pump which will detect exactly how much insulin and release it at the right time. So it's all potential in making. The more we collapse those possibilities, we shape the universe. So that's why human being is a very significant form in the universe. The human being shapes the universe, participates in shaping the universe, and also can figure out the whole reality and get out of it. That also is given as a possibility.
If human birth is destined for moksha, why is it available to such a small percentage?
See, because as I told you that our normal thing is, see, human mind is capable of knowing. So you are given a mind which is capable of knowing, but there is no guarantee that you will use that mind for knowing. That free will is given to you. And the thing is that you see with your eyes and you see forms. So the natural tendency is what? To engage. And through the data that is provided by the eyes, you also infer, right? And through that inference, what happens? You also can come to know a lot of things. But through both perception and inference, the nature of the I remains hidden and Ishvara remains hidden. And if you want to use the same process for knowing this, you will never get it. And this is why people get stuck. They ask, what is the proof that Vedanta is right? Because they want to use the same process that they use for knowing the world, for knowing Ishvara and nature of I. And they'll never get there. So that's why it requires grace.
It's not an easy thing. It's seemingly easy, I feel. Seemingly you can understand everything, but then again those intricacies, those nuances which we have to pick up and heal ourselves. There's so many. Some people might not want to do it. They say, oh God, now I've got my work.
It's hard work. It's
Yeah.
hard work.
It is, exactly. I think anything in this world, right? You want to become a doctor. Is it easy? You want to become a scientist. Is it easy? You would want to become a millionaire. Is it easy? right? Everything requires work.
But with that, they're sort of engaging in the world.
Yeah.
So
So
they
that-
may, feel, I don't know.
Yes, exactly. So that's why it requires a very little special. It's like that you are brought in this world and you have to figure things out. Either you can figure out small things, which is lovely also, or you can figure out what the biggest thing that needs to be figured out. So, Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om.